In this channel's second video, we talked about Cleveland's incredibly successful BRT, called the HealthLine, and some of Cleveland's other transit and urbanist strengths. In this video, we'll look to the future of transit in Cleveland, and we'll talk to Sam Smucny, the Secretary of Clevelanders for Public Transit, about how we get there. How can a city that's been shrinking for 50 years improve transit and prepare for the future? Welcome to Heartland Urbanist. Let's dive in. I'm Matt Caffrey, a dad and an organizer based in Columbus, Ohio. Subscribe for more videos about cities in the Midwest and local advocates who are working to make them better, denser, more equitable, and more connected. Chapter 1, Cleveland Primer. Before we dive into the future of transit and urbanism in Cleveland, let's establish a bit of context. Cleveland may be a mid-sized city today, but for much of the 20th century, it was one of the 10 largest in the nation. It was a critical port city on Lake Erie, connecting Ohio's fertile farmland to the East Coast via the Erie Canal and later the railroads. By 1920, Cleveland was the 5th largest city in the nation and a center of industry, commerce, transportation, culture, and education. It attracted immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, Ireland, and the American South. It was also a hotbed of progressive politics and union organizing, including a famous streetcar workers' strike in 1899 and labor riots in 1919. Speaking of streetcars, Cleveland had a lot of them, 425 miles of track, and in 1913, the city began developing its first light rail project, today the blue and green lines of the Rapid. Then, in 1955, the Red Line, which is heavy rail, opened. In 1968, Cleveland became the first city in the nation with a rapid transit connection to the airport via an extension of the Red Line. But meanwhile, as in other cities, streetcars were replaced with buses, and the rise of cars and the shifting of population to the suburbs harmed ridership. Of course, Cleveland faced another challenge at the same time. As U.S. manufacturing faltered, in the second half of the 20th century, Cleveland began to decline. Not just the city, but also Cuyahoga County lost population for the last 50 years. This caused a supercharged version of the urban decay we've seen elsewhere, with whole neighborhoods hollowed out. That means that as Cleveland began to rebound and work to improve transit and its urbanist cred, it faced challenges that many other cities don't. Today, Cleveland has a heavy rail line, 3 light rail lines, a BRT line, and 2 BRT light lines, as well as nearly 40 other bus lines serving all of Cuyahoga County. Chapter 2, Shrinking Revenue, Expanded Need. But Cleveland is turning a corner. The metro's population has stabilized in the last 20 or 30 years, and the city's population loss has slowed, with several neighborhoods rebounding. That progress has been based in diversifying the economy away from its previous over-reliance on manufacturing, with healthcare and related industries particularly important today. That's good and necessary, but those employers are more spread out than in the past. As RM Transit recently covered, employer sprawl is particularly challenging for cities and transit systems. And Cleveland has seen major employer sprawl. Cleveland's aging rail transportation was built for a very different Cleveland, and its maintenance is a fixed or nearly fixed cost, limiting their options of how to respond to this sprawl. Rail is usually a benefit to the transit system in a city, and as we'll discuss in a minute, it could again become an asset for the Regional Transit Authority, RTA. But because of the shifting population and employment context, it may also be a burden on the system to some extent. And Cleveland's transit agency, RTA, is funded by a county-wide 1-cent sales tax, which is a strength and a source of stability, although it's very responsive to shifts in economic fortunes. With the population of the county having declined almost 30% since RTA was established, though, the system has seen less revenue adjusted for inflation. And as for state funding, Ohio today ranks 47th in the nation for per capita investment in public transit. So Cleveland has to serve a wider set of geographies with less revenue.
They're working with a smaller budget, but trying to provide a similar level of service. There was recently a reorganization of the entire system to try to provide better connectivity and some frequency with using less actual buses, and that ends up with some wonky connections.
Chapter 3, the HealthLine. We did a whole video about the HealthLine, so I suggest you watch that for a more in-depth review. But the TLDR is that in 2008, RTA opened a bus rapid transit line that saw increased ridership, decreased travel time, and massive private investment in transit-oriented development along the line, with a 160-to-1 return on public investment. It's widely seen around the country as a model. It links Cleveland's two largest employment hubs, downtown and University Circle. While it's seen significant BRT creep, reduction in some of the features and rollbacks of some of the advantages of BRT, it is still a success story.
It has made the street more pedestrian friendly than it was in the past. So those infrastructure improvements definitely are more long lasting. The actual maintenance and operations, though, are the things that have fallen by the wayside.
But what puzzled me at the time of creating that video is why Cleveland hadn't built more BRT lines after the HealthLine. True, there are two BRT light lines, maybe even BRT inspired lines in one case, but the HealthLine remains the only true rapid transit line built in Cleveland in the last 50 years. Its high return on investment seemed to me as a great way to address Cleveland's challenges of declining revenue and sprawling need. So is the HealthLine the right vision of the future for Cleveland Transit? Or how else can Cleveland improve transit in this challenging environment? Chapter 4, New Lines and Transit-Oriented Development. With the efficiency of BRT, if the city can find more funding, BRT lines could help connect the now more sprawling employment centers into the network without sacrificing the transit experience and especially frequency, which is so essential to a reliable service. To that end, a new BRT line is being developed on West 25th Street from Ohio City to Old Brooklyn, connecting downtown, the Metro Health campus, and the zoo, as well as several neighborhoods.
And it would go past the Metro Health, which is the county-run hospital. Cleveland Clinic, University Hospital, and Metro Health are the three sort of big hospital systems. So West 25th goes down there, and then it splits and goes through Parma and some of the other suburbs in the south.
Connecting these major employers to the downtown hub and better connecting underserved, diverse, predominantly Latino neighborhoods will be really meaningful. If all goes well, it will open in 2027. The local planning agency is also in the early stages of developing plans for a new BRT line on Broadway from downtown to the southeast to Broadway Slavic Village neighborhood, an economically distressed, diverse, predominantly Black area currently completely unserved by rapid transit lines. Similarly, RTA is studying extending the Red Line, which is the heavy rail transit line, or the HealthLine BRT to the edge of the county. That area and Lake County beyond has seen a ton of development in recent decades, so this expansion would serve to dramatically improve transportation options to employers in this critical area. So new lines are likely coming. But combating the harmful effects of sprawl will also take transit-oriented development and other dense urban infill projects so that prospective transit riders live where transit can serve them most effectively. Luckily, there's an emerging consensus for density, walkability, and transit, from the mayor to county government to the regional transit authority to the regional planning organization and even the local philanthropic community and business community. There's critical work happening, with some rapid stations converting parking lots to housing, zoning reform to increase density along existing and new transit corridors, ongoing economic development adding transit-accessible jobs, and more.
Recently, like the Cleveland Foundation actually moved their headquarters to sort of right in the middle, it's called Midtown area. And that's sort of the prime example of new development that's coming in that's centered around the HealthLine.
All of this progress can't reverse the decades of hollowing out of the city and sprawl further and further out, but it can create islands of walkability and transit access that allow people to choose to live and work car-free or car-light. And those islands can expand outward over time, especially with the new and extended lines that are being planned. Perhaps most critically for the RTA, they can help expand ridership and thus revenue from the fare box and other sources. That could stabilize the system and prevent a death spiral of lost revenue leading to fare hikes, leading to service cuts, resulting in declining ridership, and thus lost revenue again. Chapter 5, funding. But all of that will take investment. Local advocates are leveraging the success of the HealthLine to promote more investment. They're making the case both for new local funding and for additional state funding. Starting with local, the sales tax hasn't been raised in 50 years. As we discussed, with shrinking population, that means less revenue adjusted for inflation. Clevelanders for Public Transit also believes the region should consider a multi-county regional transit agency, which would recapture revenue from population shifts that could potentially lead to a better, more integrated regional transportation system. They're also advocating for more state funding. As I mentioned earlier, Ohio is 47th in the nation for per-person public transit funding. In the most recent two-year transportation budget signed in March of 2023, there's $7.5 billion for highways, but only $100 million for transit. In fact, Ohio invests just 1/10 of the national average per capita on transit. Clearly, advocates aren't wrong to be advocating for more funding. Transit projects like the HealthLine show massive return on investment in economic development. And beyond economic development, transit provides other massive public benefits that are harder to quantify, from a more mobile and connected workforce to cleaner air and less traffic congestion. So what will it take to get this funding? Well, at the state level, transit is typically considered an urban concern. And Ohio's political geography means that urban districts are all represented by Democrats, yet Republicans control a supermajority of both houses of the legislature. Because of their aggressive gerrymandering, these majorities are effectively guaranteed. They're permanent. So there's no political incentive for Republicans to advocate for the interests of urban communities. And they've demonstrated this in policy, not just on transit funding, but on pedestrian safety and all sorts of other issues. So what's the solution? Part of it is gerrymandering reform, which is expected to be on the ballot in 2024. The reform would produce fairer, more competitive districts, and thus more political consequences for ignoring the interests of Ohio's cities. If you're an Ohio voter, make sure you sign the petition to get the reform on the ballot and then vote yes for that reform in November. But there's also value in changing how we talk about the investment in transit. As we've discussed in previous videos, like our interviews with transit advocates in Detroit and Indianapolis, it's critical that people who will never take transit understand how it benefits them, from less traffic and cleaner air to more economic development and more. And it's important to frame this as a choice in terms of values. We believe every Ohioan, regardless of income or zip code, should be able to get to work and school, to the store, to visit friends and family. We believe that our cities should be free of smog, crippling congestion, and ballooning road and highway maintenance bills. In a city like Cleveland, where almost 1/4 of all residents don't have access to a car, that requires investment in transit. With new funding, Cleveland could think bigger about how to address the metro's transit needs, including new BRT lines, but also possibly expanding the Rapid or building a new regional rail network. As an aside, I think Ohio desperately needs a dedicated, professional, statewide transit advocacy organization like Minnesota, Indiana, and so many other states have. Perhaps none of our cities by itself is large enough for a transit advocacy organization, so I think we need to band together and work statewide on this critical issue. Chapter 6, Other Developments. There's a lot more happening in Cleveland. New train sets for the Rapid will be coming online in the next few years, with the same vehicles on both the light rail and heavy rail lines. That should reduce maintenance costs and allow for interlining, which could possibly introduce some interesting new service. And there are 2 new Amtrak lines being studied for Cleveland, which would massively expand the city's currently crummy intercity rail connections. One would link Cleveland to Cincinnati via Columbus and Dayton, with 3 trains a day in each direction. Secondly, a route connecting to Detroit via Toledo with multiple trains a day is also in planning. This long overdue service would be a game changer for the state and the city, but it presents a challenge as the current Amtrak station has a wonky public transit connection. The waterfront line currently runs very infrequently, only during Browns games. Cleveland is currently considering moving the Amtrak station to Tower City, which is the hub of all of RTA's Rapid and BRT and many of the bus lines. Or they're considering building a new intermodal hub where the Amtrak station currently sits, with better RTA bus connections and also interstate buses like Greyhound. Presumably, that hub would then justify more frequent light rail service. A quick coda before we wrap up. Climate refuge. As the climate crisis plays out over the next century, Cleveland could become an increasingly attractive refuge. From sea level rise to extreme weather and heat, the currently booming Sun Belt and much of the country is expected to face real challenges. But the Great Lakes region is expected to be relatively unscathed by climate change. All of this leads some experts to expect that climate refugees fleeing increasingly frequent extreme storms and deadly heat waves will settle across the Midwest and especially in the Great Lakes region, resulting in surging population in the second half of the century. These trends are hard to predict, but it seems most likely that smart, careful investments in transit today could set Cleveland up well to avoid the challenges of sprawling, traffic-congested growth when climate refugees come. Today, Cleveland has a ton to offer, including pretty good if underfunded transit for a city of its size. It's walkable, cultured, and vibrant, all in an affordable package. Rent is 29% below the national average, and it could be an even better place to live in the near future, just in time for millions of climate refugees to call it home. If you want to be part of building a more equitable and connected Cleveland, join Clevelanders for Public Transit, link in the description. If you enjoyed this video, press the like button and make a contribution to the channel via LibrePay so we can keep expanding the channel. Again, link in description. Heartland Urbanist is also available ad-free on urbanist.video, a great open source community. Go check it out. Thanks for watching and see you next time.